All right. So I'm going to mute in a second. I make sure that everybody knows how to use the chat box. Me. What you're going to see on your screen are these icons. You want to select the one that looks like a cartoon bubble if you've never done it before. You're going to get a box that looks like this. You're going to type down here. Sometimes on different browsers it looks slightly different. And so what I'd like everybody to do is to put in your name and where you're from. I'll know you know how to do it. Okay? And I'm going to mute either way. I have no...
That is the bubble. I don't get that out.
I see a couple of you hitting the wrong button. You keep asking to be the presenter. No, you can't. I'll just deny you. But I do appreciate you doing that. Okay, I'm going to shut off PowerPoint because things always work better the fewer things I have on, and then we'll get started. So I'm going to, just a couple of small things. Every once in a while, depending on bandwidth, I have had people say, you know, my screen freezes up. If that happens, the best thing to do is to just log out or join me and come right back in, and usually that clears it up. So, and then I'm going to try to keep it. I'll certainly want to be able to answer any of your questions. I am going to probably ask you a lot of quick yes and no questions just to make sure people are clear on stuff, so I know that I'm not alone. So first question, how many of you have heard of conditional formatting? Doesn't mean you know it well, but at least have heard of it, yes or no? So it looks like we have some yeses and nos. I'll ask the second question, how many of you actually used conditional formatting? All right. So that question got so overlapped, I wasn't sure about which people are going used, okay? So let's just take a look at a couple of examples with this, and I'm going to explain some things, but I'm going to start out with some basics, and then I'll show you a few kind of interesting advanced uses. A lot of people poo-poo or, you know, don't see the enormous value of this because it doesn't seem to really be a calculation feature. But I would argue that it can be really helpful in analysis because data can actually jump out at you. And so I'm going to show you some examples of where it can be used in some budgeting or testing mechanisms that can be helpful, just in being able to see what's going on, certainly beyond just having nice presentations. So what I have here is a kind of a classic example. This is just not really important data, but it's just a list of students and test scores for various tests. As you can imagine, when I'm doing training, a lot of these data sets are small. In reality, these data sets might be rather large. They could be pages long or certainly many, many lines, but just to make things easier, we'll start here. And what I'm going to say is, and this will not make sense until I do it, if you're going to use greater than, you're gonna start when use greater than as your condition, greater than or equal to, start with your lowest band. If you're going to do less than, start with your highest band. And again, that probably makes no sense yet. It will in a minute. Okay, so what I'm going to do is I'm going to highlight my text, my data set. I'm going to go up to conditional formatting, which is on the home ribbon, so it's nice and easy to find. And I'm going to go to highlight rules. 1 second, I just have to close some stuff that were blocking my screen you probably wouldn't have seen. And I'm going to go to greater than. You can certainly do greater than or equal to, but I'll do greater than. I'm going to enter the data as a decimal because it's easier. I don't have to put in percents. Okay, even though the data set is presented as percents. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to say anything greater than 65. And what you'll notice is I now have two bands. I have a band of which are the white items that are anything below 65 or below, and then I have everything that's greater than 65 is my second band. What I can do here is come back to my same data set because the bands overwrite. And go back to highlight rules, go to greater than again, and then maybe pick a different amount. So let's say over 80. So I'm just going to do 0.80. Now I got to change the color scheme or I won't see anything different. And it gives you about 3 or 4 color schemes, and then you can customize. You can really have dozens. Usually 3 is enough. So here we'll do this one. And now, in effect, I have 3 bands because I have my, below 65 white, red 65 to 80, anything above 80. And I'll just do one more. And this time I'll just do, 95, okay, 0.95. And again, I got to pick a different color scheme, and now I have, I have multiple bands for my data. Now, reason why I said you want to, if you're going to do greater than, you want to start with your lowest band is it initially made everything above 65 red, and then as I added each one, it overwrote those pieces. If I had started and I was going to do less than, you could do the exact same thing with less than, then I would have started at the highest. Say anything less than 95, and then done my bands down. So that's just a little bit of a tip, okay, on how you set up. And now I have my data organized into bands. So I'm going to stop. Any questions? Anything you want me to do over again? It's pretty simple, okay? Now, one of the questions that I get asked a lot here is, okay, so what if it's not numerical data? What if it, in this case, was, just regular like test grades A, B, C, D? So I'm not going to do all of them because this would take another, half the session to set it up. So I did it already, but I'll show you basically what you would do with that. So one of the options, and I could even pick the one that's right here, and go to Conditional Formatting, you'll see it says text that contains. And now I can simply put in the text. And that'll turn it the appropriate color. So what I would have to do here is, for my whole data set, do one color text that contains, say, and I won't do all of them, I'll just do, 1 and 2. And then come back to my same, again, because you can have multiple conditions on the same data set. Come back and say text that contains B, and now, it's gonna reflect what I messed up there, okay? So, by the way, you can edit a rule. Most of the time with something like this, I wouldn't, but because this one's kind of hard to edit, but what I did is I left the same color. That's not going to work, okay? So now that should fix it, okay? So you certainly can edit them, okay, if you need to. A lot of times if it's something simple, I'll simply clear them. So I'm going to stop. Anybody have a question? How many of you, well, let me pose a question so I'll get an answer. How many of you have done something like this, okay? And the answer is no, it's not case sensitive. So, for example, I'll clear this again. And go in, and I'm just going to do one. Text that contains, and I'll just do lowercase. In my criteria, that's still going to pick it up. Also here, if this were lowercase, it would work. Okay? So no, it's not case sensitive. All right? And you don't need quotes around the text being equal. That all works. Okay? All right, so I want to just show you some other ones that are kind of within the category of the simple ones that can be really useful. So here I'm just going to clear it all. And the rules I want to show you next are top-bottom rules, okay? And you can do top-bottom rules either by percent or by amount. So we'll start with by amount, okay? So it's going to show up as top 10, but I don't even know why it says top. I guess I feel like they got to put any number in. You can absolutely select whatever you want. So it could be top 10, top 5, top 3, and you'll see that when we enter it, okay? So when you do that, you're going to get a box. It's going to say, give me all your highest grades, okay? And what I'm going to do is say top 3. And now it's going to give me my highest grades. Now, in reality, this is a useless analysis. It would be a terrible analysis, actually. A more logical analysis would be to do it by column, because that's the one test. I want to see my highest grades on that test, okay? So I probably would, again, do top-bottom rules and do, say, my top 2 on that set. And then I could come back again and do, because it's top and bottom rules, and do my bottom 2. And again, always got to remember to pick a different color scheme or you won't see anything. So here I now have my 2 lowest grades and my 2 highest grades. Now it's possible that I might have more than 2 items in red because these are modal, meaning they're looking at whatever the highest. So if I had 3 grades that were 98, there's no way it could discern which 98 to count. But as long as whatever you're doing is your lowest one, there's only one unique one, you should get 2 results, okay? And again, I could in turn do the same thing on this column, etc. And so that's, that's probably, a more useful analysis than to just do the whole set. And again, I'll just do it again because they're fairly easy to do. Just go to top-bottom rules, top 2, bottom 2. I'll try to be consistent, use the same colors, etc., etc. Now, just a couple of things to know. Once the conditional formatting is in there, it's going to remain. So regardless, so if I had this all set up, and now my data changes, I'm just deleting out my data, I'm adding new data. I think this is already formatted, so I don't actually have to put in the percents. Notice that as I put in the item, it's going to put it in the appropriate band. And that would have been, true before. So I could have this all preset, and now I enter in new data. Now, I will tell you just something to be aware of. If you're going to paste in data, be careful, because when you paste data, it's going to wipe out the conditional formatting. So let me give you a case in point. I'll just pick one number over here. Let's say I was going to move this over. I was going to copy it over. And this could have been my whole data set. Let me just do this in percent. If I just copy it, just do a regular copy and paste, I'll wipe out my conditional formatting. However, if I copy and I do a paste special, And I have to do retain, keep values and sorting format, then I'll be okay. Okay? So make sure that you, actually, I think it's if you do source formatting, it'll retain. So just to be aware of that, okay? That if you just do a straight copy in, if you're entering the data, no problem. But if you're copying in, it overwrites the conditional format, and then you have to re-enter it again. Okay, again, let me stop. Any questions? Now, I can show you some other stuff. I am going to show you other things, but so we did top-bottom rules, but let's clear the rules again, okay? And again, I'm only going to do one column at a time for this one. We'll just do a couple of columns. So before I did top items, I can also actually do top percent, which is different. So here I'm saying top percent. Now, interestingly enough, by the way, if you do top items, and you click this button, you get top percent. So it's almost like the menu. It doesn't really matter which way. If you have it unclicked, it's top items. If you select it, it'll just automatically have it clicked. So it's a bit of redundance in the menu just to make your life easier. But like, for example, here's the top 10%, not top 10 items. And here, it's just showing one item, okay? So that's kind of a small data, set. Let's say we want to do the top 25%. And so now that's going to give you your top 25%. I could do my body 25%. So these would be like quartiles, okay? For the middle, you got to play around, use a greater than, less than. But, for top and bottom, it can be really helpful, okay? So there is a little bit of a difference between top percent. Obviously, you can't do any of that with this because it just it's not applicable. You can't say A is higher than B unless you scale it. But you certainly can do it with numbers or percents. So the rest of them, they're cute. I'm going to show a few of them to you, only because they're kind of interesting. Admittedly, I don't really use them a lot, but, and they're more aesthetic, but I do want to show you a couple that are here, okay? So you can also arrange your data using a bunch of different kinds of icons or scales. And here's the first one. It's just, and there are just different choices on color. But these are kind of like each one of the items is almost like a little, I don't know, like a bar chart, horizontal bar chart, okay? You can also use, and this is the same idea, kind of the same idea. It looks slightly different. These are color scales. So this is kind of the lazy person's approach to what we did before. Rather than we selecting the bands, it just is going to well, they're not random. It's just going to divide your data into, 5 bands and basically just position the colors accordingly. But it's not as granular. You're not really selecting them, okay, in the way that we did in the first example. And then you get the crazy ones, but actually a few of them are not bad. Icon sets. So the one that I kind of like is this one. Kind of looks like data bars, okay? And an example of that, over a whole thing like this, it kind of looks overdone. But here's an example. If we wanted to look at like what portion of our expenses for the month, these are pretty low expenses, I have to admit. But maybe for the day, okay. But what our expenses are, per period, and this would be, an example of that with scales. Icon scales. Okay, questions? Any issues? Anything you want me to repeat again? Are you alive? Okay, I'm getting yes to I'm alive. Okay, all right, thank you. I'll just show you one or two more, but really, they're kind of hokey. They're kind of hokey, but they're there, okay? All right. So that's pretty much it for the basic conditional formatting. And again, lots of times, conditional formatting can be the easiest thing. So, for example, maybe I have like paid and unpaid. So I really only have like one conditional formatting, and it's text contain, and I have a word like okay, that's good, Lisa. All right, so I have a word like paid, and now I have it so that when it's paid, it generates paid. So I might have, and again, if I had something sophisticated where it was going to generate like an if statement that produced paid, then as soon as the word paid appeared, it would also appear in red. Or another one is, actually, let's make these more practical numbers. So this could be the revenue from my kitchen, if I'm in food service. And let's say I had one that was a negative, okay? And I could simply have these so that anything less than 0 is going to be red. So now anytime I'm in the red that week, that's going to appear in red. And black will be, anytime I'm on the plus side. So there's a lot of little uses of it that can be kind of handy, that are all what I would call within the basic, not too crazy, fancy examples, okay? So I'm going to show you some more. These are going to go a little more advanced. Some of them may involve some skills you're not already familiar with, so I'm going to ask you to trust me that they work, and at some point, if you decide you want to get involved in more Excel training, and we do a series, you certainly will learn all the formulas that are behind this. But I'm going to just show you some other applications of this. So once again, this is just a basic one, not really complicated at all. But let's say I just want to see what were my highest, and let me clear it first. And this is more in the basic category again. So these are my electricity use by building, okay, which makes absolutely no sense. The high school would be 4,000. Don't worry about my data here, okay? And, so maybe I just want to look at my two top highest buildings. For what electric is, or vice versa. I want to see what the lowest are, okay? So that's one example. Here's another example. And actually I picked real data for this. Each state has a little bit of a different per diem for what they allow on for daily reimbursement, which usually includes meals and tips in these figures, okay? Not hotels, obviously. Okay, so once again, I'm assuming the per diem is 55. I don't know whether I had this in already. I'll clear it so I can show it to you again. So, again, this is pretty much a basic one, but anything greater than 55 is now going to show up in red. So somebody submits 35, no problem. They do 55, no problem. They do 56. It shows up in red, and then I can spot it. It doesn't necessarily mean I won't accept it. It just means that they may have to be able to provide more evidence of it. Okay, so that's still pretty basic. Let's look at one that's a little bit more sophisticated and involve using an a feature called, actually I put a couple of things in here. I have some drop-down menus, data validation, and I'm using Vlookup, okay? So again, because it's not a session on Vlookup, I'm just going to say there's a lookup table, and the table contains all of the rates, the per diem rates for each state. And in fact, I was in, I know Ilka's with us today. I was actually in the business office, and I noticed that when they reimburse people, they reimburse them based on whatever the reimbursable rate is in the state where the event takes place. So if they go to a conference that's in Pennsylvania, it's the Pennsylvania rate, okay? Not necessarily a standard rate just based on New York. It's where you are, and each state sets a different rate for whatever reason. Okay, so these are actual rates I looked up. So these are the rates for a number of the states that I assumed were going to be coming. I don't have the rate for Texas. I apologize for a person from Texas. But I do have the Maryland rate, the New York rate. Okay, so what I have here is a lookup. Okay, so what this is going to do, the lookup is it's going to adjust the result to whatever the rate is in that state. If it's working, it's actually not working. It should be. There it goes. Okay. So notice it's, if I pick New York, it's going to give me, if I pick South Carolina, it's a different rate, right? And then what I'm going to do is do the conditional formatting related to the rate, okay? Now to do this, a couple of recommendations on this, okay? So first, we have our basic formula here. I recommend as you're setting it up, you put your basic formula in a separate cell. That's going to generate either a true or false result. It's going to make it easier to do if you set it up this way. Once you actually set it up, you can get rid of it, but it's a good idea to have it initially, okay? So basically, because the conditional formatting is a test, it's a conditional test. And if the result is true, it's going to generate the color. If it's not, it's not. If it's false, it's not. That's how it basically works. Okay, so here it's false, so it won't generate the color. Here, it's true, so it will. Okay? So I need, and any of the formulas where you do greater than, less than, equal to, if it's not in the form of an if statement, it's going to produce a true or false. Okay? So I'm going to just show you how you do this. I'll reset it again, even though I did it already. So I've cleared my conditional formatting, okay? And actually I can take the amounts out too, just so we can play around with this. Okay, so the first thing that you want to do not do a cell reference to this cell. If you do it, it won't work when you try to copy them down. You have to copy the formula. So I recommend, once you have your formula, copying it from the input bar, okay? So now what you're going to do is you're going to highlight the cells you want. You can do a whole group because it's an interesting the way it treats it. It actually understands the idea of relative copying. So if you select the whole range, it'll assume you want to go down, okay? And you're going to go to conditional formatting. You're going to go to highlight, but you're going to go to more rules. And here, you're going to use custom formula in the format. And you're going to paste the formula. Do not paste the cell reference. Paste the actual formula. Or enter the formula. And so even though you're entering E24 to F24, it's going to assume going down, you mean 25, 26, 27. It's kind of strange, but it does work. Okay, so now they're set. Okay? And what it's going to do is it's going to compare this to this. So it'll compare a different number for Maryland or Ohio than it is going to compare for New York. And again, we can test this. So we do 65, no, it's under. We do 78, it's over. Now notice that here for the second one, if we were at 50, it's over. But if we switch the state, it's not. Okay? So we have a real ability to do, a conditional type lookup that takes into account the different rate. Okay? So I don't know if I made anybody's head explode with that, but I'll show you one that's a little simpler than this, but I want to show you that you can do some fairly sophisticated customization that even can have what I'll call, logical parts to it. Maybe not for the average person, but for folks in finance or business, this is certainly a doable thing, okay? Okay, so the way I got the drop-down, the drop-downs is just conditional formatting. The way I did that is to use a Vlookup, okay, which again is a purpose of a different session. So and I'll kind of give you a basic, 5-second lesson in Vlookup. So in Vlookup, you have a lookup table. And so the conditions for Vlookup is where do you look here, what's your table, and then based on that, which column do you return? So here, this is the first column of the table. This is the second column of the table. What the false means is it has to be an exact match. So it can't be like close, okay, which is no problem here because we have New York, Ohio, etc., okay? So I realized that was doing like what is an hour workshop in like 10 seconds, but this is how Vlookup works, okay? So the Vlookup is generating the rate, and then the rest of it is the conditional format, okay? And if you want more info on that, contact me, and I'll let you know when we're doing something on Vlookup or one of the series where we cover that. For those of you who are familiar with Vlookup, I think you can get how this works. Anybody, was that helpful, Renee? To the extent you can look up Vlookup as a syntax, okay? Any other questions? Okay. All right, so let's look at, we got a little bit more time. Let's look at a couple of other ones. And this one's actually simpler. I probably should have done this one with you first, okay? So this might be something that a purchasing agent used to spot, and by the way, there's always other ways of doing this. You don't necessarily have to use colors and conditional formatting to have things jump out. But if you like this approach, because you think it's going to help you spot items, it's not a bad idea. So I'm just going to explain this one to you as well. And this is fairly simple, much simpler than the Vlookup. So what I have here is I have my rate for CPI, which I'm sure you all know what that is. That's Consumer Price Index, okay? And I'm now getting bids from my contractors for the following year. Let's assume these are all annual contracts, and we get bids, okay? And what I want to see is have jump out at me any bid that involves an increase over the CPI. If it's under the CPI, I expect that. If it's over the CPI, hey, and that doesn't necessarily mean we're not, we're not going to do it. But maybe I can lean on the contractor a little bit and say, hey, you're above CPI. Can you shave it down a little bit? Okay. And, because we could live with, consumer price, or you could pick a random number. You have to use CPI. Anything that goes over 2%, we're going to have a longer discussion about. And if it's just within 2%, I'm probably not even going to worry about it, okay? So my first thing here, and again, I always recommend setting up a table for the tests, even though later on you really could eliminate this column, okay? So I'm going to explain this formula to you. It's pretty easy formula. It says is E39, which is my current contract, is the new amount, well, actually it's D30, is a new bid greater than my original plus CPI. And this is just to bring in CPI, okay, as a percent. Because it's basically 1.0, in this case, 1.0251. So I'm saying, is the amount, if I took the amount of the current contract and multiplied it by 1.0251, would this be less than that? Because if it's greater than that, then it's going to trigger a different color. Okay? All right? And so now, let's see what happens. Okay? So in this first example, it's not. Okay? But let's say it was. And again, I know that because it's generating a true, and any true is going to give me the red. So once again, how do I do it? Well, the first thing I do is I do this formula. I make sure it works by making sure I'm getting trues and falses, and then I copy it into the clipboard, and I'm only going to do it for this one. Well, I can clear them out, okay? Sometimes you have to kind of. So I can show you, I'll do it again, okay? So I clear my rules. I now go to conditional formatting, highlight rules, more rules, use the formula. I enter the formula in. Now, I only did it for the one cell. If I had done the whole range, it would have covered the whole range. Okay, so now it's in. Okay? So for the more sophisticated folks, I know we have people at different levels here. Are you all okay with this? And if this is kind of above your pay grade, don't worry about it. Okay? Questions? See, now, actually, to do it right, so I didn't have to do every single one, I would have done this, use the formula, and then paste the formula. And then that would cover for all of them. Okay? All right? Okay. So this is really the same thing, except, and this is for folks in New York, they know what this is. We have a tax cap. I'm not even sure it's at 3%. But again, you could be basing it on 2%, 1%, 3%. That's the idea. Okay. I don't have a lot more to show you. I'll show you just a couple of other examples of this. And actually, I'm going to go to the second one first because that's a little simpler. Okay, so what we have here is, it's a food service example. And actually, I put it in because one of the people that signed up was a food service director, and she didn't show up. But it's still a good application, okay? So what we have here is, it's like an order sheet. Obviously, they order more than 3 things. So these are just a simple example of this. But they order, they order items every week. And I want a little check if the cases that were ordered in succeeding weeks are 2 or, more than 2 over what we've done, what we did in the first week. Because it might be a sign that it was a mistake. And it's an error check, It doesn't mean it's wrong. Maybe we had we had an incredible, amazing number of requests for fish sticks. Everybody has a fish stick urge, But the point is, typically it's just like a little check against, oops, that seems a little odd, right? So what I'm going to do here, again, is it's very simple formula. It's just E63, which is my second week. Is it greater than D63, which was my initial, plus 2? You actually don't need the parentheses here, probably writing it well so it's more logical to see. It would look better like that, okay? So once again, I don't want to do, in any of these, I don't want to do a cell reference. I want to make sure that I copy the formula from here. And then I want to kind of clear everything out, and I'm going to do the conditional formatting. Now, I'm just going to show you a little bit of a trick here. If I only wanted to do 1 week, I wouldn't have to worry about this. But I want to be able to copy over to multiple columns. So because I got to copy over to multiple columns, I got to lock my column. Because what's going to happen is when I copy over, it's not going to be looking at the first week anymore. I don't have to lock anything else, but I've just got to come over and with a $sign, lock my my column for my initial comparison, okay? Now, I'm not going to see any different result, but that's going to matter a lot when I end up copying it in, okay? Because now when I copy it in, I can do the conditional formatting for both weeks or 10 weeks and put this formula in. If I don't lock that column, I will not be able to copy over into multiple weeks because it'll assume when I did the relative copying across that I meant week 2 I was comparing it to, unless that's what I meant to do. Okay, so once again, here we're good. That's over 2, obviously 12, anything above 14. So 15, 14 would not, and it works again in the same, it'll work in the second column as well because I locked. Okay? So it's kind of a little odd because it's hard to really understand how it's doing this copying, but let's just say, because it is a little odd, normally we would copy it down. You have to do it by highlighting all of the cells, when you put in the formula, but bear in mind any of the things, that you might normally have to do if you were copying down or across and factor them in to what you put in, okay? And then it will work, okay? Well, that wasn't 2 over. There you go. Okay, so now, again, I could do the same thing with percents. It's just a little bit more sophisticated example. So instead of actual 2, I'm saying anything over 20%, and that's going to generate you the same result. So here, probably 14 is over 20. No, it's actually not. There you go. 15 is probably similar. Okay, so I'm a little bit ahead of schedule, but I've covered anything. Anybody have any questions, anything they want to ask? Before we wrap up, not the deepest topic, but actually really useful in a lot of practical ways. Not just for presentation, but again for analysis. Because of the ability to have things like something like this jump out at you, where at that point you might spot it, like the bids, and say, oh, why is that so high? Okay? And again, you could have set this at a different amount, just as a kind of a check against what you're doing. Okay? All right. So what do you say we call it a day? I gave you the template, so you should be able to do repeat this in 6 months when you go back to revisit it. And certainly if any of you have any questions, I'm always available. Just pop me an email or call me. Okay? Thanks, everyone. Have a great day. I hope you found this helpful.